हेलो एवरीवन, दिस इज सीए रोहित कटारिया। आज हम करने वाले हैं रिवीजन ऑफ सीए इंटर आईडीटी चैप्टर 3 चार्ज ऑफ जीएसटी। सो लेट्स गेट स्टार्टेड। सो फॉर नंबर 23 अटेम्प्ट, दिस इज योर चार्ज ऑफ जीएसटी चैप्टर। इसमें वी विल बी एबल टू अंडरस्टैंड द सीजीएसटी एक्ट, एसजीएसटी एक्ट, आईजीएसटी एक्ट इन मोर डिटेल। हम देखेंगे प्रोविजंस pertaining to levy and collection of GST, identifying the types of services and mechanisms under which reverse charge is payable under GST, and हम देखेंगे composition levy के बारे, अलग अलग डिटेल्स और फीचर्स क्या क्या रहता है, who is eligible for it, who is ineligible, what are the limits, turnover limits and conditions to be fulfilled for availing the same. So चलिए शुरू करते हैं गाइस। अब सब लोगों को मालूम है कि GST was passed under the GST Act, and the main taxable event under GST is called as supply, and CGST, SGST is levied on all intrastate supplies of goods or services, and IGST जो रहता है वो interstate supplies of goods and services पे लेवी होता है। राइट, एक जनरल रूल है फॉर इंट्रास्टेट सप्लाई, अगर एक सप्लायर का लोकेशन और प्लेस ऑफ सप्लाई एक ही स्टेट में है तो उस केस में इट विल बी ट्रीटेड एज इंट्रास्टेट सप्लाई ऑफ गुड्स और सर्विसेज लायबल टू CGST, SGST और यूनियन UTGST as applicable. And in case of interstate supply, where the location of the supplier and the place of supply of goods are in two different states or two different union territories or a state and a union territory, उस केस में उस सप्लाई को interstate supply treat हुआ जाएगा and it will be liable to IGST. So guys, these definitions you already are aware of. Exempt supply, supply of goods or services which attract nil rate of tax or may be wholly exempt from tax. It also includes non-taxable supply on which there is no GST. Aggregate turnover is an important definition, ये आपको मालूम होना चाहिए। Aggregate turnover में क्या क्या आता है? It includes the aggregate value of all taxable supplies, excluding, not including value of inward supplies on which tax is payable under reverse charge. तो वो आपके aggregate turnover में नहीं आता है, लेकिन उसमें क्या क्या आता है? All taxable supplies आते हैं, exempt supplies आपके आते हैं, export of goods or services, and interstate supplies of persons having same PAN to be computed on an all India basis, but excludes central tax, state tax, union territory tax and in IGST and cess. तो ये taxes aggregate टर्नों में आते नहीं है। क्या आता है? taxable supplies आते हैं, exempt supplies आते हैं, export की value आते हैं, and in interstate supplies of persons having same PAN to be computed on all India basis. मतलब जो आपके अगर आपके पास मल्टीपल GSTs हैं अलग अलग स्टेट्स के लिए, तो उसके जो इंटर रिलेटेड ट्रांजैक्शन है वो कट ऑफ हो जाएंगे क्योंकि टेक्निकली एंटिटी एक ही है। तो दैट इज एग्रीगेट टर्नओवर इज कैलकुलेटेड ऑन अ पैन इंडिया बेसिस। Business, you already know what business is, all these different types of services, consideration, any payment made whether in money or otherwise in respect to for the supply of goods or services or both, whether by the recipient or by any other person, but shall not include subsidy. Consideration shall not include subsidy given by central government or a state government, and also includes the monetary value of any act or forbearance in respect of inducement of goods or supply of goods or services or both. However, deposit shall not be considered as consideration unless it is adjusted against the supply. Reverse charge, right guys? Reverse charge basically means the liability to pay tax is imposed on the recipient instead of the supplier. तो जो जिसको ट्रांजैक्शन में जो पैसे दे रहा है, जो रिसिपिएंट ऑफ सर्विसेज है, रिसिपिएंट ऑफ गुड्स है, उसके ऊपर ओनस आता है, लाइबिलिटी आती है टू पे द GST, not on the supplier. So in this case, it is liability to pay tax by the recipient of supply of goods or services instead of supplier of goods or services under section 9 subsection 3 or section 9 subsection 4 or under section 5 subsection 3 5 subsection 4 of IGST Act. Right, services, anything other than goods, money, security, but includes activities relating to the use of money or conversion by cash or any other form, that is also a service. Supplier shall include persons supplying the goods. Taxable supply, supplier which is liable to GST. Non-taxable, which is goods or services on which is not liable to tax under GST. Taxable person is a person who is registered or liable to be registered under the GST Act. A person who is liable to be registered but does not take registration shall be considered a taxable person. मतलब अगर किसी ने किस पर्सन को GST registration लेना कंपलसरी है. They have breached turnover limits या due to any other situation they are applicable to take the GST registration, लेकिन उन्होंने नहीं लिया है. उस केस में भी even though they are unregistered they will be treated as taxable person. मतलब उसके since they are taxable they would be liable to all the GST provisions even if they are not registered at that point in time. ऑल्सो इन सेम केस अगर किसी ने वॉलेंटरी रजिस्ट्रेशन लिया है ही इज ऑल्सो टैक्सेबल पर्सन इवन इफ ही इज नॉट इट डज नॉट कम अंडर द रिक्वायरमेंट्स टू गेट रजिस्टर्ड अंडर जीएसटी. सो गाइज इंडिया का डेफिनेशन है इन रिस्पेक्ट ऑफ द जीएसटी एक्ट which areas of India will come under transactions liable to GST, right? Territory of India में क्या क्या आता है? You have that whole of India itself, the union territories, you have the territorial waters, the seabed, the subsoil, the continental shelf, the exclusive economic zone or any other maritime zone. ये important है. Airspace of territory and territorial waters. So हम देखेंगे कि किधर तक GST अप्लाई होता है. So as you can see, this is the baseline. ये आपको इधर दिख रहा है. That is the baseline. और उससे लगभग ऑलमोस्ट 200 नॉटिकल माइल्स, दैट्स एनएम, दैट इज नॉटिकल माइल्स तक इंडिया का एक्सक्लूसिव इकोनॉमिक जोन रहता है. एनी एक्टिविटीज, ट्रांजैक्शंस और एनीथिंग कमिंग इन दिस जोन इज comes under the laws of India, comes under the GST applicability. So up to 12 nautical miles from the baseline, यानी कि सी शोर से 12 nautical miles is the territorial waters of India. And after that from 12 nautical miles to 200 nautical miles, that is the exclusive economic zone of India. Okay, after that, that is high sea, that is international waters. State GST law, right? In law of any state. Same case with UT GST Act. Right, union territories क्या क्या है? Which are the union territories in India? You have Andaman Nicobar Islands, you have Lakshadweep, you have Dadra Nagar Haveli, Daman Diu, you have Ladakh, you have Chandigarh, and any other territories. Right, levy and collection of CGST and IGST. There should be tax called central CGST tax on all interstate supplies except on alcoholic liquor for human consumption. Central tax on supply of petroleum crude, diesel, aviation turbine fuel, you have natural gas. So these shall be applicable to GST from a certain date, as we had discussed in the earlier chapter. Specified categories, right? Government may specify categories on which certain supplies of goods or services should be made under reverse charge, not under forward charge. It may also recommend class of persons who shall pay tax on reverse charge basis. Like who is the supplier, who is the recipient who shall pay tax, like a corporate body, individual, registered, unregistered. In that case, government may also specify categories of tax, categories of services on tax which shall be paid by the electronic commerce operator. Guys, ये भी हम बाद में देखेंगे. ECO यानी कि electronic commerce operator is like a person through whom who is an aggregator of services or goods, and who is the person who is collecting the consideration, and after deducting their commission it is passing it on to the suppliers. So in that case eco को आप समझ सकते हो कि जो फ्लिपकार्ट रहता है, जो अमेजोन है, जो उबर कैब्स है, जो ओला कैब्स है, जो स्विगी है, जो जोमैटो है, मतलब जो एग्रीगेटर्स रहते हैं, इन सब लोगों को इको गवर्नमेंट क्लासिफाई करती है, एंड देयर इज अ सेपरेट GST taxation law when it comes to these people. ऑल्सो कभी कभी क्या होता है, ये जो इलेक्ट्रॉनिक कॉमर्स ऑपरेटर्स थे, कभी कभी बहुत बार, अभी समझो ईबे हो गया, अभी बाहर के जो ऑनलाइन पोर्टल्स है, walmart.com, अलग अलग ऑनलाइन पोर्टल्स दूसरे देशों के, तो इवन इफ दे आर डूइंग बिजनेस इन इंडिया एंड दे डू नॉट हैव फिजिकल प्रेजेंस इन टैक्सेबल टेरिटरी एंड दे डोंट हैव एनी रिप्रेजेंटेटिव इन द टेरिटरी, उस केस में वो लोगों को एक पर्सन अपॉइंट करना पड़ेगा फॉर द पर्पस ऑफ पेइंग टैक्स, एंड सच पर्सन शुड बी लायबल टू पे द टैक्स. So इलेक्ट्रॉनिक कॉमर्स ऑपरेटर, इवन इफ यू आर इन इंडिया और आउटसाइड ऑफ इंडिया, लेकिन आप इंडिया में बिजनेस कर रहे हो, तो उस केस में यू विल बी लायबल टू पे टैक्स. यू हैव टू अपॉइंट अ पर्सन फॉर दैट पर्पस. ओके, CGST आपको मालूम है ऑल इंटरस्टेट सप्लाईज पे रहता है, एंड इंटरस्टेट सप्लाई ऑफ अल्कोहलिक लिकर इज आउटसाइड पर्यू ऑफ CGST, इंटरस्टेट बोथ, and IGST is also not applicable on alcoholic consumption. और जो आपको रेट्स रहते हैं, यू गाइस नो दैट द रेट्स ऑफ GST आर करंटली एट 6%, 12%, 18%, 28%, and cess is also on there. So maximum rate of CGST under the act that can be 20%, right? CGST cannot be more than 20%. It is a limit which has been set by the government in this, by the GST council in this particular case. Max limit of CGST is 20%. In case of IGST, तो IGST क्या रहता है? It is a combination of CNS, मतलब दोनों को मिलाकर IGST रहता है. तो अगर एक ट्रांजैक्शन इंटरस्टेट है, उसके ऊपर IGST लग रहा है समझो 18%, एंड इफ द सेम वुड हैव बीन एन इंटरस्टेट ट्रांजैक्शन, उस केस में CGST SGST उसका आधा आधा होता है, तो 9+9 एज अपोज टू 18%. तो इस केस में क्या हुआ, मैक्सिमम रेट अगर CGST का गवर्नमेंट ने ठहराया कि 20% है, इन IGST द सेम वुड हैव बीन रिवाइज्ड टू 40%, दोनों का कॉम्बिनेशन इनटू 2, राइट. ये दीज थिंग्स आपको मालूम है, उसके ऊपर अब तक नहीं लगता है एविएशन टर्बाइन फ्यूल, नेचुरल गैस, पेट्रोल, क्रूड, डीजल, इसके ऊपर GST अब तक नहीं है. बाद में जब GST काउंसिल डिक्लेयर करेगी तब फ्रॉम अ फ्यूचर डेट GST विल बी एप्लीकेबल ऑन दीज 5 कमोडिटीज. ओके, टैक्स पेबल अंडर रिवर्स चार्ज, तो ये एक इंपॉर्टेंट प्रोविजन है. Tax GST shall be paid by the recipient of the goods or services on reverse charge basis in the following cases. Supply of goods or services notified by the government on recommendations of GST Council. कुछ ऐसे goods और service रहते हैं जिनके ऊपर गवर्नमेंट चाहता है कि जो recipient है वो टैक्स भरे instead of the supplier. And supply of specific categories by an unregistered supplier to a specified class of registered persons. मतलब अगर कोई unregistered supplier है लेकिन वो एक स्पेसिफाइड क्लास ऑफ रेसिपिएंट को सप्लाई करता है, तो उस केस में भी रिवर्स चार्ज अप्लाई हो सकता है. फॉर एग्जांपल, जो अनरजिस्टर्ड ट्रांसपोर्ट वाले रहते हैं, जो अनरजिस्टर्ड पार्टीज लाइक लॉयर्स, जो सर्विसेज इनको प्रोवाइड करते हैं लाइक कॉर्पोरेट्स, लाइक रजिस्टर्ड GST पर्सन्स, तो उस केस में रिवर्स चार्ज विल अप्लाई. तो जनरली रिवर्स चार्ज और नॉर्मल के में आई विल टेल यू द डिफरेंस. फॉरवर्ड चार्ज व्हिच इज नॉर्मल केस इन केस ऑफ GST. फॉरवर्ड चार्ज में क्या होता है, जो सप्लायर रहता है वो पूरा अमाउंट कलेक्ट करता है रिसिपिएंट ऑफ गुड्स और सर्विसेज से, और उसमें से जो टैक्स कंपोनेंट है वो हटाकर वो गवर्नमेंट को पे करता है खुद से. एंड इन रिवर्स चार्ज में क्या होता है, जो रिसिपिएंट ऑफ गुड्स है, जो एक्चुअली मनी पे कर रहा है, ही ओनली पेज फॉर द गुड्स हिमसेल्फ, और जो GST कंपोनेंट रहता है वो अलग से वो खुद ही भर लेता है. मतलब अगर आप 100 रुपए की चीज ले रहे हो जिसके ऊपर टैक्स 18 रुपीज आ रहा है, इन फॉरवर्ड के सिनारियो आप 118 रुपए सप्लायर को पे करेंगे और सप्लायर 18 रुपए GST भरेगा. एंड इन केस ऑफ रिवर्स चार्ज आप सप्लायर को सिर्फ 100 रुपीज पे करोगे, एंड जो 18 रुपीज का डिफरेंस है, जो 18 रुपीज है वो आप खुद के जेब से निकालकर आप गवर्नमेंट को देंगे एज अ रेसिपिएंट. ये कुछ स्पेसिफाइड गुड्स और सर्विसेज पे ही अप्लाई होता है, which we will see now. There are two types of reverse charge scenarios. एक तो CGST SGST एक्ट के अंडर कवर होता है और एक IGST एक्ट के अंडर कवर होता है. So कुछ ऐसे गुड्स है, सप्लाई ऑफ गुड्स टैक्सेबल अंडर रिवर्स चार्ज. For example, goods like cashew nuts, tobacco leaves, raw cotton. When supplied by an agriculture to a registered person, these are examples. Supply of lottery when supplied by state government to any selling agent. Silk yarn, used vehicles, old and used goods, waste and scrap when supplied by the government to any registered person are taxable under reverse charge. तो ये goods का example हो गया. Supply of services, now we look at services. This is a bit of a more important point. Services. So services by GTA मतलब goods transport agency, जो people who transport goods, goods transporters, courier agencies, तो उनको GTA कहा जाता है. And they also come under the reverse charge mechanism. So if a goods transport agency is providing service of transportation of goods by road to any registered factory, to any registered society, to any cooperative society which is registered, or any person registered under GST Act, or any body corporate or any partnership firm, whether registered or not, or any casual taxable person, and the GTA has not paid the GST at CGST at 6% or IGST at 12%, in that case, the recipient of service, being the factory, the society, the cooperative society, registered person, body corporate, partnership firm, casual taxable person, they shall be liable to pay the tax on reverse charge basis and not the supplier, mainly the goods transport agency. ओके, द मेन पॉइंट आपको नोट करना है कि अगर जीटीए खुद से बिल पे जीएसटी नहीं चार्ज कर रहा है, खुद से बिल पे जीएसटी नहीं चार्ज कर रहा है विच इज एट द 6+6 और 12% रेट, इन दैट केस दैट इज लाइबल, सर्विस इज लाइबल टू टैक्स अंडर रिवर्स चार्ज. मतलब आप अगर इन कैटेगरीज में आते हो और आप ये सर्विस ले रहे हो जीटीए से, उस सर्विस के ऊपर आप ही को टैक्स भरना पड़ेगा अंडर रिवर्स चार्ज मैकेनिज्म. However, इसमें एक्सेप्शंस कुछ है, तो ये आपको ध्यान से पढ़ने हैं. Reverse charge mechanism shall not apply to services provided by a GTA by way of transport of goods in a goods carriage by road to a department of the government, central, state, union territory, a local authority, governmental agencies, and which has taken registration under CGST Act only for making a TDS, for deducting tax and not for making taxable supply of goods. तो आपको मालूम है कि गवर्नमेंट एंटिटीज को जीएसटी नहीं अप्लाई होता है, एंड लेकिन वो जीएसटी रजिस्ट्रेशन लेते हैं. व्हाई? फॉर द पर्पस ऑफ डिडक्टिंग टीडीएस अंडर द जीएसटी रेजिम, टू एंश्योर दैट देयर इज नो टैक्स इवेजन ऑफ एनी सॉर्ट. तो उनको जीएसटी रजिस्ट्रेशन रहता है फॉर ओनली फॉर दैट स्मॉल पर्पस ऑफ डिडक्टिंग टीडीएस अंडर जीएसटी. तो उन लोगों को आरसीएम मैकेनिज्म अप्लाई नहीं होगा, इवन इफ इट इज प्रोवाइडेड बाय जीटीए हु इज फुलफिलिंग ऑल द अबव क्राइटेरिया. नेक्स्ट एग्जांपल में जाएंगे. अभी सर्विसेज प्रोवाइडेड बाय एडवोकेट. एडवोकेट मतलब कौन? जो लॉयर, जो लीगल सर्विसेज रहते हैं, ईदर बीइंग एन इंडिविजुअल एडवोकेट और अ सीनियर एडवोकेट और अ फर्म ऑफ एडवोकेट्स. इन दैट केस अगर वो आपको लीगल सर्विस प्रोवाइड कर रहे हैं और आप एक बिजनेस एंटिटी हो in the taxable territory, registered party ho, and you are getting this legal services from them, in that case you will have to pay the GST on reverse charge basis. जो कोई भी legal services आप अवेल करते हो उसके ऊपर आप GST आप ही को भरना है under reverse charge and not the supplier being the lawyer. Also, supplies services provided by an arbitral tribunal. जो आर्बिट्रेशन रहता है, जो आर्बिट्रेरी जो एक आउटसाइड ऑफ द कोर्ट मैकेनिज्म रहता है फॉर रिजॉल्विंग डिस्प्यूट्स विच आर लीगल, कॉन्ट्रैक्चुअल, लीगल इन नेचर. इन दैट केस जो आप सर्विसेज अवेल करते हो उसके ऊपर का जो रेम्यूनरेशन आप कंसिडरेशन पे करते हो उसके ऊपर का जीएसटी आपको भरना है अंडर रिवर्स चार्ज. सो दिस इज नॉट एप्लीकेबल टू फॉरवर्ड चार्ज. इसके ऊपर भी रिवर्स चार्ज आता है बिकॉज इट इज वेरी सिमिलर टू दैट लीगल सर्विसेज which we read earlier. Also, services provided by way of sponsorship to any body, corporate or partnership firm by any person. मान लो अगर आपको कोई भी एक स्पॉन्सरशिप प्रोवाइड कर रहा है, बी एक्टर, सेलिब्रिटी, any business, any person, if it is being provided to any body, corporate or partnership firm, in that case the recipient, being the body, corporate or partnership firm, they shall be liable to pay tax under reverse charge. And where a service is being supplied by the government, the state government, union government or a local authority, being a municipality or any of the panchayat, anything, to a business entity, मान लो business entity, not individual, excluding renting of immobile property and services like services by Department of Post by way of speed post, express post, life insurance and agency services other than to a government, or any services in relation to an aircraft, transport of goods or passengers. In that case, any business located in the taxable territory shall be liable to pay tax under reverse charge. Right? So let's look at this once more. Services provided by the government to a business entity. All services provided by government to business entity, excluding renting of immobile property and services by Department of Post by way of speed post, parcel, life insurance, agency services provided to a non-government person, and services in relation to aircraft or vessel, or transport of goods or passengers. Other than these services which we have seen, all other services provided by government which are being received by any business entity in the taxable territory, that is liable to reverse GST under reverse charge. Just to clarify things, if government is you are a business, government is renting you a warehouse, in that case they will charge GST under forward charge. That does not come under reverse charge because they have specifically excluded renting of immovable property under this clause. If you are a business and you are availing services of courier services, your speed post, express parcel post, in that case GST will also be under forward charge. The post office will collect GST and you will not have to pay under reverse charge, that will be forward charge. These are the exemptions which are stated here, which you are seeing. These are not liable to reverse charge. Everything other than these are liable to reverse charge only if you are a business entity registered under GST. Like we said, the services supplied by government by way of renting of immovable property to a registered person. Services supplied by government by way of renting of immovable property to a person registered under CGST Act. Any person registered under the CGST Act, that will be under reverse charge. If they have not charged GST in the bill itself, then that will be liable to reverse charge. You will have to pay GST. Services supplied by way of person by transfer of TDR, which is transfer of development rights or FSI, floor space index, by any person to the promoter, then in that case the promoter will be liable to pay tax under GST. Or long-term lease of land by any person against consideration in form of upfront amount called as a premium, development charges, or any other charges for construction of a project by promoter by any person. In this case, the promoter of the project has to pay GST under reverse charge. Services supplied by a director of the company to the said company. The company has to pay tax under reverse charge. Services supplied by an insurance agent to any person carrying on insurance business. The person carrying on insurance business has to pay tax under reverse charge. Services supplied by a recovery agent to a banking company or NBFC. In that case, the banking company or NBFC has to pay tax under reverse charge. A recovery agent being a person who recovers assets of defaulters who have taken loans. Supply of services by a music composer, photographer, artist, or permitting the use of enjoyment for copyright relating to an original work to a musical company or a producer. In that case, the music company or producer is liable to pay tax under reverse charge, and the supplier being the music composer, photographer, artist. In that case, the music company will have to pay GST under reverse charge, not the composer or photographer. Supply of services by an author by way of transfer or permitting use of a copyright relating to an original literary work to a publisher. In that case, the publisher himself will have to pay tax under a reverse charge, not the author. But in this case, the author has the ability to pay tax under forward charge if he has taken registration under GST Act and he files a declaration that he exercises the option to pay GST under forward charge and to comply with all the provisions applicable, and he should not withdraw from that option for at least 1 year. And he makes a declaration, the invoice issued by him to the publisher. Supply of services by the members of overseeing committee to the RBI. In that case, the RBI shall pay tax under reverse charge. So members of overseeing committee will be getting paid remuneration charges. Services supplied by individuals, direct selling agents to a bank or NBFC. So by individual DSAs, right? Other than partnerships, corporates or LLPs to banks. So the individual direct selling agents, in that case, the bank or the NBFC shall be liable to pay tax under GST. Same is the case with business facilitator. Banking company has to pay under reverse charge. In case of agent of business correspondent, the agent is a supplier. The business correspondent has to pay tax under reverse charge. In case of security services, guys, so the security services which are provided, they are outsourced to a contractor. In case they are provided to a registered person, uh, any person other than body corporate, and the person is a registered person, in that case they will have to pay tax under reverse charge on the security services being received by them. However, this shall not apply to a government entity. If the government is taking security services, if the government is taking security services, in that case there will be no liability to put on reverse charge. For example, say archaeology department is hiring security guards for a monument. In that case, on that transaction, there will be no GST because it is a service being provided to the department or establishment of the government. But if it is, say, a security services being provided to a bank by a person other than a body corporate, in that case, the bank shall have to pay tax under reverse charge. In case of renting of any motor vehicle, guys, this is important. If you are renting any motor vehicle where the cost of fuel is included, where the fuel cost is included in consideration charged, and the service is provided to a body corporate, in that case, the body corporate shall pay tax under reverse charge. However, the supplier of the service should be a person other than a body corporate and who doesn't issue invoice charging GST. So if the body corporate is not issuing an invoice which includes GST, then in that case, the recipient, being the body corporate, shall be liable to pay GST under reverse charge. However, the motor vehicle charges should be including the cost of fuel also. In case of services of lending of securities, in that case, the borrower shall be liable to pay GST and the lender shall not be liable. So all these above services have been notified for reverse charge under both the CGST, SGST Acts as well as the IGST Act. So in case of interstate supply, reverse charge will also be applicable. The following explanations are there. The person who pays liable to pay the freight located in taxable territory, which is person who supplies receive the service. Okay, the person who is liable to pay freight for the transportation of goods, the person who is paying the actual consideration, shall be treated as the person who receives the service for the purpose of notification. Matlab, for the purpose of determining who has to pay reverse charge. If you are paying to the transporter, paying consideration to transporter, then in that case you are treated as the person who receives the service. Even if you are paying on behalf of another person, say you are the supplier and you are paying a third party transporter for transport for the recipient on behalf of recipient, but you are the one who has paid to the transporter. In that case, you shall be deemed to be the recipient for purpose of paying GST under reverse charge on transport services. Right, body corporate. We shall see the definition of body corporate. Body. This is important. It includes a company incorporated outside India, but does not include. It includes all companies and corporates incorporated outside India, but does not include a cooperative society, any other body corporate, which the central government may specify. The entity which is a litigant or a petitioner shall be treated as person who receives the legal services. Also, Okay, let's move on. Person liable to pay GST on goods transport agency services. GTA services are taxable at two rates, right? There are two rates for the same service. There is one rate is 5% and the other rate is 12%. So 5% is the IGST rate. If it's C or S, it's 2.5 plus 2.5. Same is the case with 12%. That is IGST. If it is interstate, that will be 6% plus 6%. So you can charge, the rate will be applicable at 5% if the goods transport agency has not taken the input tax credit on goods, and where the GTA opts to take ITC on the supply. For example, ITC on trucks, ITC on inward supplies. In that case, they will have to pay GST at the higher rate of 12%. Let's see a brief summary of all this. Who is liable to pay tax on transportation service? अगर GST 5% पे है, in that case recipient is one of the specified recipients like body corporates, partnerships. In that case they will be liable to reverse charge, where GST is payable at 5% and the recipient is other than specified recipient, right? Other than specified recipient, like say unregistered individual end consumer. If I am sending a parcel to my grandmother, if I'm sending a parcel to my uncle, in that case, that would be unregistered individual consumer and that would be exempt from GST. Where GST is payable at 12%, right? 12% may, that will be recipient is one of the specified recipients. Okay, recipient is one of the specified recipients, meaning body, corporate, partnership, registered person. In that case, it will be liable to be GST be paid at forward charge. The transport agency would be the one paying the GST, and the GTA would pay the GST. And the recipient of GTA service is the person who is liable to pay freight of transportation of goods. Meaning, if someone else is paying the amount and someone else is receiving the goods, but for the purpose of this clause, the person who is liable to pay GST under reverse charge will be the person who actually pays money, pays consideration to the goods transport agency, even if they are not the actual recipient of the goods. Same in case of the motor vehicles, which we just saw. There are two rates also in here. That's 5% and 12%. So just like the GTA example, you can take only limited ITC, and in 12% there is no restriction on ITC, right? When it comes to limited ITC, what do I mean by that? ITC of input services in the same line of business. For example, say you are a broker of sorts. You have vehicles, but a particular client is requesting a vehicle in an area which you don't have any vehicle available. So you tie up with a third person who also, so a second person who also provides your same type of services. In that case, if that person is billing you, you can take ITC on that and adjust against your output liability, because it is input service in the same line of business. Let's see the overall view of this. Person liable to pay tax under renting a motor vehicle service, where GST is payable at 5%, and the supplier is other than body corporate, then the recipient is a body corporate, then reverse charge is liable, and the body corporate who receives the service shall be liable to pay tax. However, the supplier of the service of renting of motor vehicle is a body corporate, and the recipient the supplier is a body corporate, and irrespective of whoever is the recipient, GST will be liable to pay under forward charge, meaning the supplier himself will pay GST. Right, taxability of remuneration paid to directors. Sometimes the services are provided by independent directors or other directors who are not employees of the company. So, meaning it is not in terms of salary. Payment is not in terms of salary. In that case, they are taxable. Those transactions are taxable, and the company shall be liable to pay tax on reverse charge. In case where a director is an employee, the next step would be to see whether the activities are in course of employee-employer relationship or not. because if there is that employee-employer relationship or it is in terms of salary, in that case GST would not be applicable on that payment. As I said, director's remuneration, which is declared as salaries in the books, is not taxable for GST purpose. Further, the part of the remuneration which is declared other than salary and TDS is cut under 194J, in that case, that is treated as consideration for providing services which are outside the scope of Schedule 3 and therefore taxable, and hence on reverse charge basis. Now coming to this important point, tax payable by the ECO. The ECO is called as electronic commerce operator. You know them as Flipkart, Amazon, Uber, Ola, Zomato, Swiggy. These are aggregators, right guys? They take services from different vendors on their platforms, and they facilitate the suppliers and the recipients being the individual end consumers. What they do is they take payment from us, the individuals, and they take their commission, they cut their commission and forward the money to the suppliers. In that case, what government has decided is that in that case, tax should be paid by the ECO himself. So to more streamline it and to make it more easier for all parties involved. So the definition of an ECO is any person who owns, operates, or manages an electronic platform for supply of goods or services or both. Sometimes what happens is the e-commerce operator himself also sells goods, and also the services or products are sold by third parties, supplied by some other person other than the ECO. In that case, the price is collected by the ECO from consumer and passed on to the actual supplier after deducting commission. Some services have also been notified by government on which tax shall be paid by the ECO, like transportation of passengers in a motor cab, radio taxi, motorcycle. Classification under GST, in order to determine the rate, we have to classify the goods or services. So a classification, like if you know HSN codes, harmonized system of nomenclature, SAC codes, these are the overall classification norms. You have the overall sections, then you have chapters, under chapters you have headings, you have subheadings, then you have tariff items. HSN stands for Harmonized System of Nomenclature. Indian customs tariff is based on HSN. So this system is widely used not only for GST but for Indian customs as well. It is developed by the World Customs Organization, or called as WCO. So HSN is developed by the World Customs Organization to ensure that there is synchronization across in world trade in terms of classification of goods and services, to ensure that all over the world there is a similarity in classification of goods and services, and there is harmony when it comes to doing transactions across borders. It is identified by a 6-digit code. However, code can also be extended to provide more details, and India has extended the HSN codes up to 8 digits. The rules for interpretation, which are given by the Customs Department, has a set of rules and interpretations which give direction as to how the nomenclature in the schedule should be interpreted, and these rules are also applicable to interpretation of the rates for goods and services under GST also. When it comes to services, you have a scheme of classification for services under GST. The various headings have been classified, like construction services, financial services, personal services, business services, etc. You also have here chapter under that section, under that heading, under that group, and under that finally tariff item or service code. So broadly, the GST rates are all of them are when you look at IGST, it's 0.25, 3, 5, 12, 18, and 28. These are the ones which are there as of now. Similar is there with services, except certain rates are not there. Like for IGST, you have 1.5%, 5%, 7.5%, 12%, 18%, and 28%. Let's look at certain examples. So the government wants to ensure that when it comes to GST, the government's viewpoint is this, is that goods or services which are essential, which are important to day-to-day living, to ensure that all lives of Indians are of a good quality, and people should not be unnecessarily bothered, and which are those goods services which are discretionary or which are luxury goods or sin goods, those should be taxed higher, so to prevent their usage. So when it comes to gambling, admission to entertainment events, to movies, amusement facilities, sporting events like IPL, services provided by race club, these are discretionary or luxury services on which they attract the highest rate of tax. And some things are subject to a low rate of tax. Some, for example, some sort types of insulin, which is a life-saving drug, they are subject to a 5% rate of tax. Some things which are very essential, like fruits and vegetables, they are totally exempt from tax. Things like milk. So the government is using the GST norms in such a way so as to ensure that there is harmony and equality is there in ensuring taxation of goods and services. And there is a general rule that services which are not covered under any specific heading are generally taxed at the rate of 18%, which includes for IGST, if it's intrastate, that would be 9 plus 9. So GST in the real estate sector, guys, the real estate sector is also liable to GST under certain situations, which we'll find out now. The rate of GST on real estate sector by new projects are 1%, 1% GST without any ITC on construction of affordable homes, right? Affordable homes. What does that mean? In metros, the area is 60 square meters or 90 square meters. In non-metros, and value up to 45 lakhs. That is classified as an affordable home, and the rate is 5% without ITC on construction of all houses other than affordable homes. So exceeding those square footage requirements or value requirements, and commercial apartments like shops, offices in a residential project in which the carpet area of commercial apartments is not more than 15% of total carpet area. In that case, they will come under the 5% slab. The conditions for the above rates are there is no ITC whatsoever. 80% of input and input services shall be from registered persons like cement, TDR, FSI, development charges, etc., etc., construction charges, labor charges. If value of inputs is less than 80%, then the promoter has to pay GST on reverse charge basis at the rate of 18% to the extent short of 80% rule. Where cement is received from an unregistered person, the promoter shall pay tax on such cement at the rate of 28%. And GST on capital goods like say elevator, generator set shall be paid on reverse charge basis at the applicable rates. Right, now we'll come to composition levy. Guys, composition levy is a scheme which the government has come out with to ensure that those small taxpayers which do not have a huge turnover and who are in doing business in certain as per certain requirements, to ensure that they are not burdened with unnecessary hassles with too many compliances. The government has come out with a composition scheme for them, wherein they will be able to pay tax at a flat rate, at a low amount of rate on their overall turnover, and they will be subject to lower regulatory requirements like say quarterly filings instead of monthly filings, and they can avail this scheme subject to certain requirements, namely turnover requirements and some other requirements which we will get to see now. So a registered person whose aggregate turnover did not exceed 50 lakhs can pay tax at the rate of 1% in case he is a manufacturer, 2.5% in case of person engagement with supplies, and 0.5%. However, the government may increase the said limit of 50 lakhs to 1.5 crores as recommended by the council. Further, a person who opts to pay tax under composition scheme may make services of value not more than 10% of the turnover in the preceding financial year of 5 lakhs, which was higher. So services, there is a limit on the amount of services he can make. The value shall not exceed 10% of turnover in the preceding financial year or 5 lakhs, whichever is higher. The person shall be eligible to opt for the scheme if he is not engaged in supply of services subject to those norms. He is not engaged in making any supply of goods or services which are not leviable to tax. He is engaged in making any supply of goods or services through an e-commerce operator. He is not engaged in making goods or services through e-commerce operator. He's not a manufacturer of such goods, and he's neither goods which are recommended by which are notified by the government, and he is neither a casual taxable person, nor a non-resident taxable person. Where more than one registered persons having the same PAN number as in different states GSTs, the registered person shall not be eligible to opt for the scheme unless all registered persons opt to pay tax under that subsection. So basically, if a person has multiple GSTs across different states, in that case, they can only opt for composition scheme if all of the registered persons together opt for composition scheme. A registered person who is not eligible to pay tax under that section, whose turnover did not exceed 50 lakhs, may opt to pay in lieu of tax an amount of tax calculated but not exceeding 3% of turnover if he is not engaged in making supply of services which are not leviable to tax under this act, engaged in making any interstate outward supplies. So guys, person making interstate supplies of goods or services is not allowed to take composition scheme. Engaged in making any supply of goods or services through an e-commerce operator who is required to collect tax at source, a manufacturer of goods or services which are notified, a casual taxable or non-resident persons, these people cannot take a composition scheme. Okay, the option availed by the registered person shall lapse on the day that his turnover exceeds the limit, as the case may be. So if there is a limit for availing the composition scheme, and on the day that that limit is exceeded, the option which has been availed by that registered person of composition scheme shall automatically lapse. A person who is registered under the composition scheme shall not collect any tax from recipient on supplies made by him, nor shall he be entitled to any credit of import tax. So basically, in composition scheme, the person cannot charge any tax separately in the bill. He cannot collect any tax from the recipient, and he is also not entitled to any input tax credit on any supplies which he purchases. If you have wrongly come under the composition scheme and the officer of GST is of the view that any other additional tax has to be payable, he can be liable to a penalty also, and additional tax might be payable. So even if you are wrongly availing the composition scheme, you might be liable to certain penalties and payment of excess tax, which has been uh, taken. Guys, for taking the aggregate turnover, that includes the aggregate turnover includes the value of supplies made from 1st April of a financial year till the date the person becomes liable for registration under the Act, but it does not include any value of exempt services by way of extending deposits, loans, or advances, so far as consideration is represented by way of interest or discount. So in case this is not your main business, supply of services of deposits, loans, advances, and you are earning interest or discount, that will not form part of your aggregate turnover for the purpose of this composition scheme registration. Let's look at the overview. It is an alternative composition scheme is an alternate method of levy of tax for small taxpayers up to a prescribed turnover. And the objective of this scheme is to make sure to ensure the simplicity and reduce the compliance burden on the small taxpayers. They have the option to pay tax with a concessional rate of 1% that includes CGST and SGST, and restaurant service providers have to pay tax at the rate of 5% of the turnover, right? If you are in that category of business, if you are doing a restaurant business, you have to pay tax at 5%. The turnover requirements are small taxpayers having turnover up to in the preceding financial year up to 1.5 crores are eligible to pay tax at these rates in the current financial year up to an aggregate turnover of 1.5 crore. If you cross that turnover of 1.5 crores, you automatically exit from this scheme and you become a normal regular taxpayer. But a person engaged in supply of services other than restaurant services is not eligible for composition scheme under these subsections. A person, in order to provide benefit of composition scheme to persons engaged in supply of services other than restaurant services whose aggregate turnover is in the preceding FY is up to 50 lakh rupees, a scheme was introduced where they can pay tax at 6%, which is 3 plus 3 and 6% IGST. A mixed supplier who is supplying services other than restaurant service along with marginal supply of goods can also avail the benefit of scheme, where the majority is services. In that case you can also avail these composition scheme for services. Essentially this is for small service providers like hair salons, stylists, tailors, where they can pay tax at 6% up to the turnover of 50 lakh rupees. The main positives or the benefits of this scheme for suppliers are they do not need to worry about classification of their goods or services, like what is the HSN, what is the SSE code, because they have to pay a flat rate of tax irrespective of what type of supply they are making. They don't have to worry about the rate of GST applicable on the goods. They do not have to raise any tax invoice. They just have to raise a simple invoice with just the rate. No tax has to be separately added. They issue a simple bill of supply. The eligible person shall obtain to pay tax under composition scheme shall, instead of paying tax on every invoice at this rate, shall pay tax at the prescribed percentage, which we saw earlier, every quarter. And he shall pay without availing any ITC. So in composition scheme, you cannot avail any input tax credit. And the registration under GST law is compulsory for opting for composition scheme. If you are opting for composition scheme, you will have to compulsorily get yourself registered under GST. The turnover limits, as we have seen, is currently the turnover limit is at 1.5 crores. It used to be 50 lakhs, but now it has been increased to 1.5 crores for a supplier of goods by the government. However, you have to keep in mind that this turnover requirement does differ when it comes to special category states. So in earlier chapters, we had discussed about the special category states. which had different criteria for turnover when it comes to registration also. In respect of 8 special category states, the turnover limit for availing composition scheme for goods shall be 75 lakhs in respect of these 8 states. These 8 states, Arunachal Pradesh, Uttarakhand, Manipur, Meghalaya, Mizoram, Nagaland, Sikkim, and Tripura, have a lower turnover requirement of 75 lakhs for availing a composition scheme. You must remember, you can remember in the previous chapters we have seen that the 4 special category states of MMTN, Manipur, Mizoram, Nagaland, Tripura have a lower threshold requirement for actually being registered under GST, which is 10 lakhs as opposed to the other limits of 20 lakhs. However, in case of certain special category states of Assam, Himachal Pradesh, and Jammu Kashmir, the turnover limit would be 1.5 crores and not 75 lakhs. Also, it is important to note that the aggregate turnover is computed on an all India basis. So even if you are a taxable person and you have branches in 2-3 states, for computing your turnover requirements, you have to add up the turnover from all the branches across the various states. A person dealing in shoes makes intrastate supply of goods from both these offices, right? He has offices in Goa and Maharashtra, and he makes intrastate supply, not intrastate supply of goods or services from both these offices. To check whether he is eligible to avail the composition scheme for goods, the turnover of both offices shall be taken account, and both offices shall not exceed 1.5 crore in the previous financial year, and he can opt to avail this scheme subject to fulfillment of other criteria for both the offices. In case of turnover limit for composition levy for services, that is 50 lakhs. A person has a salon in Delhi and Haryana making intrastate supplies, not interstate. In that case, the turnover of both of those salons shall be taken into consideration. If both does not exceed 50 lakhs, then he can avail the composition scheme for both the salons in both the states, because they are making intrastate supplies and the turnover in previous financial year did not exceed 50 lakhs for both of them combined. To summarize, guys, all states except special category states, certain special category states, the aggregate turnover to avail the composition scheme in previous FI is up to 1.5 CR for goods, and for special category states, that requirement is 75 lakhs in previous financial year, and a person who is opting for composition scheme for services has to have aggregate turnover up to 50 lakhs in the preceding financial year. Aggregate turnover, to recap, as you all know, it includes the sum of taxable supplies, exempt supplies, export of goods or services, and interstate supplies. But you should know that it does not include the value of inward supplies on which you have to pay reverse charge, and taxes including GST and cess. And this aggregate turnover is computed on an all India basis, and all the for a person having the same PAN despite having multiple GST registrations. Okay, guys, rates of tax, as you all know, which are there for the composition levy, it does vary for some schemes. For manufacturers other than manufacturers of notified goods like ice cream, pan masala, tobacco and aerated waters like sodas, in that case rate of tax is 0.5% of the turnover, half plus half, which is 1%. In case of suppliers making restaurant supplies, restaurant services, that is 2.5% or 5%, 2.5 and 2.5%. Any other supplier eligible for composition levy, any other supplier other than these categories, it is a flat rate of 1.5 plus 0.5 plus 0.5%. Okay, this tax, let us see this example. Tolaram is a manufacturer who has 2 units in UP and MP. The total turnover in the last FI was 1.5 lakhs. So let's see, both of these states are not special category states. Hence, they are eligible for composition since their limit is not more than 1.5 crores. The turnover in the current FY for which we are calculating the tax is 5 lakhs and 10 lakhs. In the first quarter is 5 lakhs and 10 lakhs respectively. The amount payable is they have to pay total tax at 1%, which is 0.5% CGST, 0.5% SGST. So let's calculate that tax. On 15 lakhs, 1% you will have to pay, which comes up to 15,000 rupees total, which they will have to pay. Taxpayer Bhola Ram is a trader who has both taxable and exempted goods. Showrooms in 2 separate states, both selling taxable and exempt goods. Total turnover, right, including all taxable and exempt goods, was 1.5 lakhs. So hence they are also eligible. Turnover in the current year, okay, is 35 lakhs. 5 lakhs from taxable, 10 lakhs from exempt, and 20 lakhs. Okay, so the composition tax has to be paid only on the taxable goods and not on exempt goods. However, the turnover for the turnover requirement, the sales of exempt goods are also kept into consideration to ensure that the turnover requirements are met, and turnover of both taxable and exempt goods should not exceed 1.5 crores in the previous financial year. In this case, let us calculate the amount of tax payable under composition scheme by this person. So taxable turnover in this first quarter is 5 lakhs in Punjab plus 10 lakhs in Rajasthan. So total taxable turnover is 15 lakhs, on which you'll have to pay tax at 1%. Since he's a trader, that will come out to 15,000 rupees GST payable in this quarter. Okay, let's see. Padmavati is a salon stylist who has opted for composition scheme, having a branch in Delhi and Haryana. Total turnover of both branches in the last FI was 45 lakhs, okay, which is good since it is under 50 lakh rupees. And turnover of the branches in this current FY in the first quarter is 15 lakhs. They will have to pay tax at the rate of 6% since it is a service. And they're opting for composition scheme, and they fulfill all the criteria. So 6% of 15 lakhs, that comes out to 90,000 rupees. Like we have said, for the purpose of determining tax payable, right? For determining the actual tax payable by a person, the turnover requirement, the turnover which is being made from 1st April until the date on which you become a taxable person liable for registration, that amount is not does not come under your taxable taxable requirement, because you are not liable for registration until that time. And exempt supply of services by way of extending deposits, loans, advances, wherein the consideration is interest or discount. In that case, there will be no taxability on that in terms of GST. Right, as we saw, what is included in turnover includes all taxable exempt supplies made within the state, outside the state, but does not include CGST, SGST, IGST, or any other cess, any tax. Does not include value of inward supplies liable to reverse charge. does not include value supplies from the first day until the date when the person becomes liable for tax, and does not include exempt supply of services provided by way of extending deposits or loans wherein the consideration is represented by way of interest or discount. Let's see this example wherein Mr. Champak is a photographer, like providing services in Delhi from April this year. His turnover is as follows. He has started the supply in the current FY. His previous previous FI is nil. Turnover in previous FI is 0. Consequently, he is eligible for the composition scheme, and he becomes eligible when he became eligible for registration when his aggregate turnover exceeded 20 lakh rupees, since he is providing services. While registering for GST, he opts for composition scheme. Let's determine his turnover and his taxable amount. So since he became taxable after crossing the 20 lakh threshold, this amount will be excluded for the purpose of determining GST, right? So this no GST payable, but for the turnover in the next quarter of 30 lakhs, he'll have to pay GST at 6% since he opted for the composition scheme. So 6% on the 30 lakhs, that comes out to 1,80,000 rupees total. And by the end of that quarter, his turnover has met the composition scheme limit of 50 lakh rupees. So after that, he can no longer be part of the scheme, and he has to register himself as a normal taxpayer and pay tax at the rate of 18%, which is liable to the photography services. In that case, the tax payable for the next quarter, October to December, for the 20 lakh rupees services will come out to 18%, which is 3.6 lakh rupees. This is very important, guys. Pay attention, because certain people cannot opt for composition scheme, and we will find out who are these people. So registered people who are not eligible for goods composition scheme, people who are engaged in making any supply of goods or services which are not leviable to tax. If you are making any goods or services, supply of goods or services which are not leviable to tax, you are not eligible for composition scheme of goods. If you are engaged in making any interstate outward supplies of goods or services, meaning if you are making any supply outside of state boundaries, if you're making interstate supply, in that case you will not be eligible to opt for composition scheme. A person, if you are supplying any goods through an e-commerce operator who is required to collect TCS, say you're supplying goods on Flipkart or Amazon, obviously anyone from across the country can buy those goods, so it would come into interstate supply. In that case, if you are supplying goods or services through an e-commerce operator who is required to collect TCS, you cannot opt for composition scheme for goods. If you are a manufacturer of ice cream, pan masala, tobacco, and aerated water, I know it is a funny combo, but if you are a manufacturer of these 4 items, you cannot opt for that composition scheme for goods. Also, there is an amendment which I want to show you guys. For this chapter, we have an amendment where these certain manufacturers of these goods cannot opt for composition scheme, which we discussed earlier, the ice cream, pan masala, tobacco, and aerated water. In addition to these 4 items, we have certain new items which also cannot opt for composition scheme for goods and services. They include fly ash bricks. जो आपके सीमेंट के ब्लॉक्स रहते हैं ना, उन्हें बोलते हैं फ्लाई एश ब्रिक्स, हैविंग एग्रीगेट कंटेंट ऑफ 90% और मोर फ्लाई एश. उनके ऊपर आप उनके मैन्युफैक्चरर कंपोजिशन स्कीम नहीं ले सकते. ब्रिक्स ऑफ फॉसिल मील और सिलिसियस अर्थ्स, they cannot apply for composition scheme. Building bricks, earthen और roofing tiles, उनको भी composition scheme में entry मना है. So to recap, the manufacturer of these above goods are ineligible to opt for composition levy. They include manufacturers of ice cream, pan masala, tobacco, and tobacco substitutes, aerated water, fly ash bricks, building bricks, earthen or roofing tiles. These guys are not eligible to opt for composition scheme. Okay, we have covered all the amendments for this chapter. Let's move on. Also, people who are not eligible for composition scheme include a supplier who is a casual taxable person or a non-resident taxable person. So I'll tell you, non-resident taxable person, obviously one who is not resident in India, lives in another country. Casual taxable person means a person who is a casual person who moves from one place to another and takes GST registration for different places for different spans of time. I'll give a great example of this. Let's take a circus, right? Circus goes from one place to another. They stay in a particular place for a certain amount of time. They they do their turnover, provide their services, and then they move to another place. So in that case, they would be called as casual taxable person because they are taking registration for certain period of time for certain different places. And supplier of services. So basically a supplier of service cannot opt for the composition scheme which is made for the goods. Now let us come to the composition scheme for services who cannot opt for composition scheme for service. Obviously, supplier engaged in making supply of goods or services which is not leviable to tax. If you are making interstate outer supplies, if you are supplying goods or service through e-commerce operator, or supplier of notified services, supplier who is either casual taxable person or non-resident taxable person. One more example of casual taxable person. You know, people have fairs, exhibitions of say pottery, whatnot, which move fairs, exhibitions which go throughout the country. People who participate in those fairs, who sell their goods in such fairs, they can also be called as casual taxable persons because they have met the if they have met all of the requirements of turnover and other requirements, but they are moving from one place to another and they are making sale which is intrastate in different states. So in that case, they will be also classified as casual taxable person. One important point to note for you guys, right? There is no restriction on a composition supplier to receive interstate inward goods. गवर्नमेंट क्या मतलब कहने का मतलब क्या है कि आप लोग कंपोजिशन में आना चाहते हो तो आप इंटरस्टेट सप्लाई खुद मत करो, लेकिन आपको माल बेचना है, आप बाहर के स्टेट से माल जरूर मंगा सकते हो. फॉर एग्जाम्पल, इफ यू आर अ किराना वाला एंड इफ यू आर सेलिंग बिस्किट्स, सॉफ्ट ड्रिंक्स एंड व्हाट नॉट, आप बाहर के स्टेट से सप्लाई मंगा सकते हो, लेकिन आप बाहर के स्टेट्स में वो सप्लाई नहीं कर सकते हो अगर आप कॉम्पोजिशन में रहना है तो. एंड एज वी सेड अर्लियर, अगर कोई पर्सन एक छोटा सा सर्विस का सप्लाई कर रहा है, मार्जिनल अमाउंट other than restaurant service, is also eligible for composition scheme of goods. However, there is a value requirement. The value should not exceed 10% of the turnover in the preceding financial year or 5 lakhs, whichever is higher. Let's look at this example. Ram Sevak is engaged in supply of goods. His turnover in preceding is 60 lakhs. He's eligible for composition. He can supply services other than restaurant services up to a value exceeding 10% of previous year FY, which is 6 lakhs, or 5 lakh, which is higher. Hence, he can supply services in the current FY up to 6 lakh rupees. If the value of services exceeds 6 lakh rupees in the current FY, then he becomes ineligible for composition scheme and hence he has to opt out of the same because he is no longer meeting the requirement of a balance between supply of goods and services. As we know, interest income does not come under the value of turnover. because that is not your turnover in your day-to-day business. That is hence is not considered for the purpose of turnover requirements under GST. Like we said earlier, these goods are not eligible. Manufacturers of these goods are not eligible for opting for composition scheme. In addition, we saw those fly ash brakes, earthen tiles. They are also not eligible. Also, person who is opting for composition scheme, he has to comply with following conditions, right? Following conditions. He has to pay tax under reverse charge on inward supply of goods or services on which is applicable. He cannot be a casual taxable person or a non-resident taxable person. He has to mention the words composition taxable person, not eligible to collect taxes on top of bill of supply issued by him, and he shall mention the words composition taxable person on his place of business on every signboard displayed, where he is making supply on which goods are liable to be taxed under reverse charge. The tax has to be paid under the reverse charge section. So just because you're in composition doesn't mean you are exempt from reverse charge, complying with the reverse charge scheme and paying tax on certain goods or supplies under reverse charge. Intimation of or opting, intimating for the taking composition levy. A person who is applying for registration has to intimate the department. He has to do so in part B of the registration form, which is called as GST REG 01. The same shall be considered as an intimation to pay tax under composition scheme, and such intimation shall be considered only after grant of registration has been done to the applicant. A registered person who is already registered under the normal scheme has to file an intimation online on the GST website, and such intimation has to be filed prior to commencement of the FY for which the said option is exercised, and he has to furnish a statement in prescribed form for income for input tax credit within 60 days from commencement of the relevant FY. The option uh, The option to pay tax under composition levy shall be effective from the beginning of the FY only. Right? You cannot opt at any time of the year unless you are a brand new, you are taking up a brand new registration. If you are switching to composition scheme, you have to intimate before the start of the FY itself. A person applying for registration can opt for composition time for registration, and the composition levy shall be effective on date on which registration is effective. As I said earlier, सो वैलिडिटी ऑफ द कॉम्पोजिशन लेवी, ये स्कीम के जो रेट्स है कब तक आपको लेवी आपको आपको वैलिड होंगे, दैट इज अंटिल यू मीट द टर्नओवर रिक्वायरमेंट्स. अगर आप उनको एक्सीड करोगे तो फिर आप स्कीम से ऑटोमेटिकली बाहर हो जाओगे. The effective date from which withdrawal from the scheme shall take effect, the date on which you shall be withdrawn from the composition scheme shall be date indicated by you in your intimation, but it shall not be prior to commencement of the financial year in which such intimation filed. Generally, it should be the day on which you exceed that aggregate turnover limit which is applicable to you. You can also voluntarily opt from the scheme. You will have to give a application to this effect, and the date on which effective date on which withdrawal shall be take effect shall be the date indicated by the person in the application. but it shall not be prior to the commencement of the FI in which such application is being filed. Certain cases, the tax officer, the proper officer, can also deny the taxpayer to pay the to have the option to pay tax under composition scheme under certain, if he has reasons to believe that the registered person is not eligible for the same. In case of denial of option, the effective date of such denial shall be from a date, including a retrospective date, as may be determined by the tax authorities. It shall not be prior to the date of contravention of provisions. In case you have been denied to be part of composition scheme, you have to compulsorily also submit a form containing details of stock of inputs and inputs contained in work in progress or finished goods held in stock on the date on which option is withdrawn within a period of 30 days from the date from which the option is withdrawn or the date of order denying the composition scheme. As we have seen earlier, if you have multiple GSTs under the same PAN in different states, you have to adopt the composition scheme uniformly at the same time. As we know, composition supplier cannot collect tax, he cannot enter into credit chain, and there is penalty in case of irregular availment of composition scheme. To recap, let us recap. Interstate supply is liable to CGST, SGST, UTGST in case of Union Territory, and interstate supply is liable to IGST, the IGST Act 2017. It is CGST, as we all know, levied on interstate supplies. IGST is on interstate supplies between two or more where location of supplier and place of supply is located in two different states. Alcoholic liquor for human consumption is outside the scope of GST. Highest maximum rate for CGST is 20%. Max rate for IGST is 40%. We all know these 5 goods on which there is no on which GST will be notified at a later date: crude, diesel, petrol, natural gas, and ATF. Tax payable under reverse charge on certain notified goods or services. Tax payable by electronic commerce operator on certain services or goods. Composition levy, as we just discussed. Turnover limits, you all know, for special category states. For 8 states, it is 75 lakh rupees in the previous financial year. For other states, it is 1.5 crores to be eligible in the previous FI to be eligible to enter the composition scheme. Rates of tax for goods manufacturers, you have 1%. For restaurant people, you have 5%. For everybody else, you got 1%. If you're providing services and your turnover is up to 50 lakh rupees in the previous FY, you have to pay tax at the rate of 6%. Conditions for composition levy, you cannot be casual taxable or non-resident taxable person. You have to pay tax under reverse charge. You cannot be in manufacturer of goods which we saw: ice cream, pan masala, tobacco, aerated water, fly ash brakes, earthen tiles. And you cannot charge tax in the bill separately. You have to mention that you are a composition taxable person and you are not eligible to collect tax on supplies. You have to mention that clearly on top of the bill of supply which you issue. And you have to mention that you are a composition taxable person at a permanent place in your business. As we saw earlier, these are the terms under which you are not eligible. If you are making any interstate outward supply of goods or services, you are automatically ineligible for composition scheme, be it goods, be it services. If you are making interstate outward supplies, you are not eligible for this scheme. If you are making any supplies of goods or services through an e-commerce operator who is required to collect TCS, you are not eligible for this scheme. If you are casual taxable person, non-resident taxable person, you are not eligible. Person who is supplying goods and opting for composition scheme can make supply of services other than restaurant services value not exceeding 10% of previous FI's turnover or 5 lakhs, which is higher. To recap, you cannot take input tax credit if you avail composition scheme, and there shall be a penalty in case you are availing the composition scheme irregularly, even if you are not eligible. चलो अभी थोड़े क्वेश्चन सॉल्व करते हैं बच्चों. सॉल्विंग करना बहुत जरूरी है. It helps you sharpen your mind and helps you practice for your exams. So this is why we do question solving. Let us start. ये बंदा जीएसटी भरने के लिए लायबल है कि नहीं? Provided recipient is in the taxable territory. Services provided by arbitral tribunal. कौन भरेगा जीएसटी? कौन भरेगा जीएसटी? कौन भरेगा जीएसटी? बताइए बताइए बताइए. Reverse charge GST is payable by the recipient. Sponsorship services provided by company to individual. ध्यान से पढ़िए, ध्यान से. Provided by a company to an individual. इस पे आएगा कि नहीं RCM? बताइए मेरे को, बताइए. Provided by any person to any body, corporate or partnership firm is liable to reverse charge. However, the service has been provided to an individual, hence reverse charge will not be attracted, and GST is payable by forward charge by the supplier being the company. Renting of immovable property by the government to a registered business entity. You tell me. GST is payable by under reverse charge with the recipient because the service is provided by the government and the recipient is a registered person. Mr. Goyal, an independent director, has received sitting fees for attending board meetings. Who is liable to pay the tax in this case? We are assuming that sitting fees do not come in the definition of salary, and is being TDS is applicable under 194J. So who is liable to pay tax in this case? Let us see. Person liable to pay tax is the recipient of services, namely the company, because GST on supply of services by the director of a company to the said company is payable on a reverse charge basis. Raghu Associates provides sponsorship service to Cricket Academy and LLP. The person liable to pay tax in this case. Who will be the person liable to pay tax in this case? In case of services provided by any person by way of sponsorship to any body, corporate or partnership firm, GST is liable to be paid under reverse charge by such body, corporate or partnership firm located in the taxable territory. Further, for the reverse charge purposes, LLP is also considered as a partnership firm. Hence, the Cricket Academy is liable to pay GST under reverse charge since the Cricket Academy is the recipient and it is an LLP. Safe Trans, a GTA, transported goods of Kapil, partnership firm, which is not registered as GST, determined person liable to pay tax in this case. In case of service provided by GTA in respect of transportation of goods by road to any partnership firm, whether or not registered, GST is liable to be paid by such partnership firm. So in this case, since GTA service has been provided to the partnership firm, whether or not it is registered, GST is liable to be paid by such firm itself. Hence, Kapil & Co has to pay GST under reverse charge. An advocate receives legal fees from a company having a turnover of 50 lakhs and presenting a FI. Who is liable to pay tax? Who is liable to pay tax? Legal fees. What do we see about legal fees? Legal fees are chargeable to tax under a reverse charge. Hence, the recipient has to pay tax since it is being legal services supplied by an advocate to any business entity. It is being legal services supplied by an advocate to any legal entity. State the person liable to pay GST in the following independent cases. Provided a recipient is in the taxable territory. Insurance agent to insurance company. Tell me, insurance agent to insurance company. You know this, guys. GST on services supplied by insurance agent to any person carrying on insurance business is payable under reverse charge. Therefore, in the given case, GST is payable under reverse charge by the recipient insurance company. Services supplied by a recovery agent to a car dealer. Let's find out. GST on service supplied by a recovery agent to a banking company or NBFC is payable under reverse charge. However, since the service will be provided to a car dealer, GST is payable under forward charge by the recovery agent himself. Security services provided to a registered person. Security service, what do we know? RCM. GST is payable on security services under reverse charge by the recipient. Right? Correct. Sultan and Sons, a partnership firm, is a wholesaler for taxable product P and a Q exempt by way of notification. Aggregate turnover, the preceding FI is worth 30 lakhs. The firm wishes to opt for composition scheme. Tell me, can they apply or not? In the preceding FI, they have turnover of 130 lakhs, which is lower than the turnover requirement of 150 lakhs. So are they eligible or not? The accountant is of the view that a person engaged in making supply of exempt supplies is not eligible. Is this true or not? Is this true or not? Not engaged in manufacture of notified goods, right? We're assuming that he does not make pan masala, ice cream, bricks. The view taken by the accountant is not valid. A registered person with an aggregate turnover up to 1.5 crore, including an exempt turnover, is also eligible for composition scheme. He must not be engaged in making any goods or services which are not liable to tax under this act, and must not be engaged in making any interstate outward supplies of goods and services. It is engaged in making only interstate supply of goods, and P and Q, P is taxable, Q is labeled tax, so exempted. Therefore, it is eligible to opt for composition scheme. Person availing composition scheme in Haryana crosses turnover in the month of December. Will he be allowed to pay for the remainder of the? No. Why? Because once you cross the turnover, you are required to file an intimation to the GST department from withdrawal of the scheme, and then onwards you have to give a statement of the details of your stock of input as on that date, and you have to be a normal regular taxpayer filing the normal returns, and you are out of the composition scheme. Whether you can register eligible, whether you are eligible for composition scheme and turnover is not exceeding 1.5 crore. Mohan engaged in trading of pan masala. Available or no? Not available. Sugam, office in Punjab and Haryana, and supplies goods in neighboring states. Interstate sale, not eligible. Hence, Okay. In the manufacture of goods. Oh, this one tripped me up too, guys. This is a very tricky question. A supplier engaged in the manufacture of goods is not eligible for composition scheme of ice cream, pan masala, tobacco. However, Since Mohan is engaged in trading and not manufacturing, engaged in trading and not manufacturing, and the turnover is not more than 1.5 CR, he is eligible for composition scheme. Eligible, guys, this is a very tricky question. You have to keep in mind that only manufacturers of these items, only manufacturers of these certain items are not allowed to be part of composition scheme. However, if you are engaged in solely trading of these things, then you can opt for composition scheme. In this case, since they are making, in the other example, since they are making interstate outward supplies, you are not eligible for composition scheme. Subramanian has two places of business. It was aggregate turnover was 120 lakhs, which should pay tax and composition scheme from one of places, while normally for other, right? They want to pay composition for one place of business, and in another place of business they want to have normal scheme. Two registered places of business in Delhi, एक का composition, एक का normal. ये कर सकते हैं कि नहीं, बताइए बताइए. They have to opt for either composition for both or regular for both. You cannot opt a composition for one or your place and a regular scheme for other. That is not allowed. Mr. Ajay G has a registered repair center where electronic goods are repaired service. His repair center is located in the state of Rajasthan and he is not engaged in making any interstate supply of services. Aggregate turnover previous FI was 45 lakh rupees, which is less than 50 lakh rupees. Can he opt for composition scheme, or is he eligible to opt under section 10(2)(a)? Considering the payment of tax, optional payment of tax available, compute the amount of tax payable, assuming his aggregate turnover is 35 lakh rupees. If he procured a few items from neighboring state, procures. देखते हैं. Let us find out. Okay. Previous 1.5 CR up to 10%. But he is an exclusive supplier of services. He is not eligible for that. Since he is exclusive supplier of services, he is not eligible for composition scheme under section 10 subsection 1 and 10 subsection 2. Under section 10 subsection 2a, there's an option to registered person whose aggregate turnover is up to 50 lakhs of pure services and not eligible to pay tax under composition scheme for goods. In that case, you can pay tax at the rate of 6%. Since the previous turnover does not exceed 50 lakhs, you can pay tax at the rate of 6% at 35 lakhs, which is 2,10,000 rupees. Coming to the next part of this question, there is no restriction on interstate procurement of goods, since there is a restriction on outer supply. However, but this is an inward supply of interstate goods. In that case, the answer will remain the same, even if Mr. Ajay procures few items from the neighboring state, because the rule is on outward supply, not on inward supply. Messrs United Electronics, a registered dealer, procures few items. United Electronics is supplying electronics in Karnataka. Their aggregate turnover is 120 lakhs. They also provide repair and maintenance services. Okay, services also included. Let's find out. Examine whether the firm can opt for composition scheme. Yes, they can. Turmeric crude, yes, they can. Up to what amount can service be supplied? Okay, remember the clause which we read. People opting for composition supply of goods can provide service up to 10% of their previous year's turnover or 5 lakh, whichever is higher. So previous year's turnover is 120 lakhs, what is 10% of that? That's 12 lakhs. 5 lakhs and 12 lakhs, which is higher? 12 lakhs, of course. In that case, they can provide services only up to 12 lakh rupees. If they exceed that amount, they will have to leave the composition scheme. Hence, they can opt for composition scheme, and they can also supply services up to 10% of turnover previous year or 5 lakhs, which is higher. Hence, they can supply repair and maintenance service up to value of 12 lakh rupees in the current financial year. So guys, that is the end of chapter 3. I hope you enjoyed this revision video. It would be great if you could subscribe to the channel. You will get access to more such revision videos in the future, and also join the Telegram channel link in the description. आपको और बहुत videos मिलेंगे of mock test RTPs and other such revision videos. So do subscribe for that, guys. Thank you for watching, and we'll be back soon.